On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, join us as we interview Jacob Imam, the co-editor of New Polity and the co-founder of the College of St. Joseph the Worker. Learn about all of that and more on today's episode of Uncommon Sense. Hello and welcome to Uncommon Sense. I'm Gretelyn Darkey, one of your co-hosts. I'm joined with my wonderful co-host, Joe Grabowski. Hi there, Joe.
Hi, Gretelyn.
And as I said, we are blessed to be joined by Jacob Imam. Jacob, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
You know what? Thanks so much for the short introduction. I think the only things I'd really add is that I live in the beautiful, dilapidated Rust Belt town of Steubenville, Ohio. We have seen better days here, perhaps, but we feel like we're living our personal best. My wife and I moved here about 3.5 years ago. We got 2 little kids. They're both firebrands, 2 and not quite 1. And I just finished getting my doctorate at Oxford, so we're glad to just kind of be in the Ohio Valley full time now instead of bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, that's quite a commute.
Yeah, the boat, the rowboats, they're tough.
Yeah, it's a long way.
Yeah, it's wet, rainy, it's cold.
It's very exciting though. So just as someone who is rather new to New Polity, never heard of the College of St. Joseph the Worker, but it sounds exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about those two things?
Sure, absolutely. So New Polity is part think tank and part venture studio. It's the way that I put it. So what do we think about in our tanks? We sit down and we look at the Catholic social tradition as it pertains to issues of politics and economics, family life, the things that start to make Christianity less sentimental and more real, where it really begins to change the pattern and order of our everyday life. And then we try and not just be all talk and no game about it, but really put it into practice, and hence the venture studio side, where we're trying to create new companies in our town, helping revitalize it in a particularly and quintessentially and exclusively Catholic way. So there is always something radical about following Christ. When he comes into the world, he creates something new, that he reveals to us truths that we would not have gotten to otherwise. And thus, being a Christian is going to make us look really different from how we were prior and from everyone else. And so we're trying to follow our Lord and carrying on the precepts and in his footsteps.
Wow, that's deep.
So, but let me get it lighter. No, the College of St. Joseph the Worker is one of the projects of New Polity. It's trying to tackle a number of projects that or a number of perhaps problems that we see in higher education, whether you're looking at the shackling debt or the woke ideology, this idea that you often find in maybe the opposing pendulum swings in liberal arts education, where we think of knowledge is for knowledge's own sake, and we're hoping to raise up a new class of students who simultaneously will study the Catholic intellectual tradition and the skilled trades, to graduate financially net positive instead of up to their eyeballs in debt, having a great career in a real way, a real life in which they can incarnate the things that they've learned in the classroom.
Awesome. That's really exciting. Wow. Joe, you have anything? I got to take a second and just take that in.
Yeah, it's so I've been familiar with New Polity for a while, Jacob, and appreciated particularly your series on Good Money, the podcast series, and I recommend that to all our listeners and go back and listen to. And what so excites me about what you all are doing there in Steubenville, but really more broadly what's going on in Steubenville, is this embodiment of the kind of ideals of localism and distributism that Chesterton and Belloc wrote about, but also we find commensurate with the Catholic social teaching. And so kind of if you could just maybe walk us through the the fundamental principles that guide what you're trying to do, and why, why is localism important beyond sort of the feel good sentiments that anybody, even a secularist, could kind of get out of localism. What is it about localism that's, for us as Christians, theologically important?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, to without trying to get too highfalutin here, we just kind of think about what are the things that you really want out of life. You want to be able to sit down with your friends, enjoy, a good meal together, be with one another, and walk out your front door waving one another. You just like there's when you kind of put it all together, it's like we really just want friendship, which is the fruit and the effect of virtue. And so when we're talking about and thinking about and trying to live out a just Christian social order, it really does have that as its goal, the life of virtue, so that we might be happy, so that we might have we've set the stage, we've set the occasion, we've entered into the occasion of happiness. That's really what we're trying to do. And friendship, which of course is interchangeable with love in our tradition, is something that is personal. You can't just love humanity, you have to love a human. And so when we're talking about the ideas of localism, or the kind of the priority of the local rather than the distant, what we're really talking about is a priority of love over the bureaucratic, the personal over the profitable, or the purely profitable. We're talking about trying to get to the things that we really just all want and love, and finding some sort of real stability within that priority.
That's very Chestertonian too. Surprise, surprise, right? But I know I love that, especially the idea of the personal as opposed to just the universal. Um, yeah, I was snooping around a little on the New Polity website, and I was really interested in the definitions of liberalism and
Mm,
what that has done to the world, and sort of the reaction that you guys are trying to have to fix that. um, yeah, and just the sort of idea of like, humanity as this blob that doesn't really mean anything, doesn't actually help us at all, and can in fact make it easier to make us into hostile groups as opposed to
right,
friendly neighbors.
right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I had a funny conversation with somebody once where he was telling me that he really loves the people in South America who was picking coffee beans for him, and that whenever he goes up to the barista and orders his drink, it's like that's just not actually possible. I mean, it really like just seems like something that you're trying to justify yourself to, and it's not
Yeah.
like you need to throw out, quite almost everything with the bath water. We can baptize quite a bit, man. There's a lot, there's an exorcism or two in every baptism, but there's things to hold on to, but we don't need to. There's different ways of evaluating and thinking about the different things that we get involved with in our society. But the thing that we cannot do is undermine the real glory of love. And I think so often when we're trying to, justify parts of our life, we try and make it out to be holier or better or more virtuous than it really is, when we might have some better excuses up our sleeve. And we also just know that we're often lying to ourselves when we're trying to make jokes like that, or, I mean, statements like that. I mean, we just really have to be aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then being docile to the tradition as she's informing us of how to repent, change our minds, and change our hearts, and thus change our behavior.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Yeah, what I love in New Polity's focus and the focus of the college is this idea that we talk about our incarnational faith and kind of putting a human face on things, whether it be charity, or even our worship, that you have to have that personal encounter with Christ. And certainly, we learn from the great saints that you do encounter Christ in the poor and so forth. But
Yes.
there has been this divorce, and this is something Chesterton and Belloc complain about. There's been this divorce between the call of the gospel and practical lived out everyday life in Christianity. in its most extreme form, the articulation, I always think of Father McNabb, who would say that, like, to live in a modern city is an irritation of sin. And he wasn't being a scold with that, but he was basically saying that, we kid ourselves if we remove the actions that we undertake in the market, in the economy, from questions of our eternal salvation. Christ certainly didn't do so, and the church does not, and so we cannot either. What do you have to say about that?
You know what? I think I've noticed this in fundraising a little bit, and I mean, this might be taking some jabs, and so I apologize to anybody that that you know, if this steps on anybody's toes, I'll try and tread as lightly as I can. But um, within Protestant circles in particular, you find an extraordinary generosity. Um, what I've noticed, people who are making a tremendous amount of money and then giving away a tremendous amount of money. Now the stats for giving for Protestants, it's not great, but it is double for Catholics today. And what I've noticed is that amongst Catholics, there's a greater radicality in our willingness to depart completely from this worldliness, this world's order. And we call those people monks and nuns. And like they just go off and they give everything away and they follow Christ. And so then the people who are making a lot of money in the Catholic world have said, well, I'm not doing that. And therefore, I am going to live kind of a normal life. And so, whereas you compare that to the Protestant folks that I've gotten to know and enjoy tremendously, that they are trying to live both the life of a monk and the life of an average person at the same time because they don't have a distinction between various vocations in the way that the Catholic church does. And so they're okay to kind of do the thing in the workplace that most people do, but then give in a way that's more radical than most people do. And so part of both sides, the Catholic and the Protestant, needs a corrective there. The modern Protestant, the modern Catholic needs a corrective there in realizing that every point of our life, every moment of our life should be transformed by Jesus Christ, for his glory. And our life just becomes so much more enjoyable, real, and identifiably Christian when we do. We've gotten so far into evangelizing where we're just trying to change people's minds on things without actually changing their life completely. The pattern and order of the average Catholic's life today looks oddly similar to the pattern and order of the average spiritual but not religious American today. You save in the same way. You live in the same neighborhoods, the same suburbs, or the same cities that Father McNabb hated so much. That you want your kids to go to the same college, to get the same degrees. You have the same mutual funds. I mean, like it's all very, very similar. Your internal beliefs are different, and that might animate some variations in your life. Absolutely. But from the outside, if you're an alien coming in, say it's more or less the same. And I think Christ is calling us, I mean, clearly Christ calls us to something a bit more than that. And when we're then evangelizing, calling people into a life that is different as well.
Amen. Yeah. Chesterton talks about, I'm not going to be able to pull the quote from memory the way that Dale always can, but he talks about how anything may be irrelevant to the proposition that Christianity is false, but nothing can be irrelevant to the proposition that Christianity is true. And he says, whether you're talking about
Great line.
I don't remember the exact examples he uses, the binomial theorem or the hypostatic union, whatever it happens to be, everything becomes kind of transformed in this totalizing worldview. And I think that's something that you definitely share in common with him, or at least that appears to be intrinsic to your approach.
Yeah. Oh, God, I hope so. Yeah. Thanks.
Kind of gonna use that as a little segue just to see if you could share a little bit of your Chestertonian experience with us, Jacob. It's obviously informed some of what you think here, and Either that or it's just a really grand coincidence. But, just tell us what your connection is and how that affects what you do now.
You know what? I'm so embarrassed to admit this to you, but I think it really is because we were formed in the same Catholic tradition, that we have so many of these overlaps. I think a lot of folks outside of the kind of the Chesterton Belloc circles, which are live and beautiful today, will often kind of demean those circles. A, because they don't really know the arguments, or and they just kind of look down at farming generally. I don't want to get my hands dirty, and so just hear a quick thing about a cow and then run the other direction. Much, much, really to their lack. But but for me, I think it really is kind of the reading some of the same documents that he did, the same church fathers, the medievals, and then obviously finding later on in the encyclical tradition, that I've loved so much, and that he did it as well. But of course, we all have our kind of favorite Chesterton books and lines, and some of those for me have been like from What's Wrong with the World, of the banker who goes off to the middle of town and pretends to work all day. Well, meanwhile, his wife goes off to the parks and doesn't even try.
Mm,
I think that bespeaks some real fundamental shifts in the way that we view work, which is ultimately a theological consideration in our
mm,
modern society, that we really hadn't considered kind of as a race of Westerners, since the pagan empires that Christianity once converted. And so I think what he was actively seeing in his considerations of the problems of the baking industry, which leads to this odd notion of nobody knowing exactly who owns what, um, or the fact that ownership of the means of production is becoming so dwindled and um, so rare, that he says, drops crazy lines with the problem of capitalism is that there are not enough capitalists. I mean, he's seeing these things transform before his eyes in a very radical way. And today we're just used to it. We think this is the way that the world is. And in reading Chesterton, I, who is seeing the devolution live, is so helpful to for us to recognize what is exactly what kind of fish tank we're swimming in today. Mhm.
mm,
So we can identify the problem and speak about the problem, but I know you have a conference called Redeeming Politics coming up this summer. I think that's the title, correct? Yeah, Redeeming
That's right.
Politics,
Yeah. Hmm.
and I'm sure that will be something our audience may be interested in. I'm going to go to it for sure, and it's neat to see, if you haven't been, to get to Steubenville and kind of see some of the transformation that's going on Fourth Street with local residents investing in their own local community and trying to kind of revitalize this neighborhood. So maybe tell us a little bit about first of all the conference and what people might expect if they
Sure.
sign up to attend there, and also just what's up with Fourth Street and what happens on the first Fridays there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we really are a community of friends engage in a common work together. And so that's one of these things that you wake up every morning, you never question why you're getting out of bed. You always know you have a great task ahead of you and great people to do it with. And so we really like our conference because we get to share a little bit of our common work with others. We hope that it would inspire others as well, and so that we might then turn to see what they're doing in other cities and in their neighborhoods, and then get inspired in turn. Our conference, Redeeming Politics, Money, Sex, and Power, baby. Those are our three subjects of this conference. And you really, I mean, it kind of sounds funny in some regard, but there is actually a real theological move that's going on with these three things. I mean, you just think about what are the evangelical counsels, the things that the church has admonished us to consider and to in some way engage in our whole life. That's the counsel of poverty, of chastity, and of obedience. And of course, the friars and nuns and will take these great vows, so that they are never going to have a personal bank account. They're always going to be obedient to their superiors. They're never going to have families. But it falls to us laity to redeem those things, to sanctify the temporal order, as Vatican II puts it. So whereas the friar, won't have a bank account, we engage in profitable economic activity. Whereas they're not going to have a family, we're going to get married and we're going to have kids. And whereas they take these vows of obedience, we do take over politics and we do try and transform the temporal order for Christ. And so, if we, in keeping with these counsels, are going to sanctify the temporal order, then we need to think deeply about how to do that in a way that actually takes those admonishments from Christ seriously. And so we're really looking forward to an opportunity of thinking about that at the conference out loud together. We got some, great speakers coming from Notre Dame and the John Paul II Institute, Chris Check from Catholic Answers. I think he's a buddy of the Chesterton Society as well. Will be there, and so we're going to have some live conversations about money, sex, and power while we're there. There's going to be some other things like the Doherty family. They're a very um, articulate and fun and lively uh, farming family in town. And they'll do a farm tour for those of us who are coming in earlier. There's so many people that are turning to homesteading, and they have um, done quite an impressive job of taking a piece of land that is completely unusable and turning it into quite an impressive farm. And then Friday evening we'll have our first Friday festival. Then, as mentioned, we are in this dilapidated Rust Belt town, and downtown was just empty. I mean, it's still majority empty. The majority of storefronts in our downtown are boarded up still. But the thing that really got so many of us focused on bringing life back to downtown were these festivals where we board up 2 blocks, we put a stage out, we have a number of bands come through, food carts. About 2,000 to 3,000 people come down for each one, and so it gives us a little glimpse about what downtown could be like one day.
That's wonderful. And I love both the idea of not giving up on a town, sort of seeing those empty storefronts as opportunities as opposed to just a waste or whatever. And I'm very inspired by this sort of holistic, radical approach of the challenge of, if Christ is the king of your life, he's the king of your whole life, and
Yeah.
show us, that's really exciting that you guys are doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing a little bit about your conference. We're going to turn this around and share a little bit about our conference,
Awesome.
which Jacob is going to be at. If you want to talk to him some more there, you can. We have not only the talks, but there's these wonderful afterglows that we have where you get to literally talk to speakers, and it's honestly, I know a few people who come and they don't even attend the talks. They just come to the afterglows. But come and do it all and see how you can learn more. Go to chesterton.org/conference. You can sign up. You can learn more. You can forward it to all of your friends, whatever you want to do. But we would definitely love to see you there. You can pick Jacob's brain a little bit more and learn some more about New Polity too and the college. So check that out. It's chesterton.org/conference.
Yeah, it's a very exciting moment for me because this is sort of a distributists of the world unite moment, because you'll be there, and Chris Check, who's a speaker at your conference, will also be attending our conference and taking part in the Troubadours alongside another great thinker in this avenue, Joe Pierce. So I think it's going to be a really exciting time, especially if it's your first conference. Please do come out and see what it's all about, see what all these people forming community can do, both in local settings like in Steubenville, but also making prudent and judicious use of the new tools of technology, like we are here in this podcast, that are available to us, forming those more disparate communities of intention that we have online and throughout the country and the world. So I was wondering, Jacob, if you wanted to comment on. I know that I believe anyway. Your dissertation was on the topic of money,
Right.
and you know, here we are in the season of Lent, and I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, almsgiving. At a local Knights of Columbus meeting recently, we had a ministry come in. These young women who are, you know, they're just out of college. They basically do missionary service in the inner city to the homeless, to
Oh,
people that are in drug recovery and or maybe need to get into drug recovery, and they help them out. And the all the knights, you know, kind of the old guard of the Knights of Columbus, there were like, oh, let us write you a check. This is beautiful what you're doing. And
mm,
I loved the answer that these two young ladies gave us. They said, honestly, we don't want your money. We want you to go and meet these poor people yourselves. Go find them, have an encounter face to face,
wow.
and
Awesome.
you give them from your own generosity. And that really struck me. And I think that from what I've read of your work on money, there's kind of an important ingrained lesson there about the true meaning and the true purpose of almsgiving that you could maybe help unfold from that.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful story. Alms, you mentioned we're in Lent, and prayer, fasting, and almsgiving are the three pillars that are supposed to be defining this time. And it's so often that almsgiving portion gest left behind, next to the other two. Yeah, I guess I'll think about something at one point, but I'm really going to try and not eat chocolate or crisps or lunch or whatever it is, and then I'll try and do a Lexio every day or go to adoration every day or something like that. But we just totally forget about almsgiving. And yet the sacred scriptures speak so often in Tobit and Sirach and Proverbs that almsgiving atones for sin. And that's what this season is for, is to help us be able to purify ourselves with Christ in the desert by his grace so that we might be ready for Pascha, that we might be ready for Easter. And so then there's a question of, well, how on earth does almsgiving actually atone for sin? That is so radical. And if it wasn't in the Bible, we wouldn't believe it. It's just one of those things. And the answer really comes down to um, a real corrective of a tangible reality of our sin. So when God created the world, he gave it not just to some of us, but to all of us. And so when you read through the church fathers, it doesn't matter which one you do, they all say the same thing about almsgiving, is that if you have more than what you need, then you have something of someone else's. The Catechism, the 1996 Catechism, actually says this explicitly again, and demarcates almsgiving not just as a form of fraternal charity, that it is, but also as a form of justice, because it's grounded in giving to another what is rightly their due, what was originally theirs by creation, by God's first gratuitous gift.
Mm.
And so atoning for sin starts to make a little bit more sense in this, because what we're doing is we're making up for the deficiencies that have arisen in the world through sin. That's what we're doing in almsgiving. And that's one of the things that make it just so powerful. So much of to carry on with this line of thought for just one more second.
Please.
Please.
You think so much about today in the American competitive capitalist system is that everything is competition. Everything is war in some way. That you're waking up, you're rising, you're grinding, you're trying to get ahead, you're trying to make something of yourself. Ambition, just like pride, is considered to be a virtue in today's society rather than a vice, and it always has been a vice. I mean, that's one of those things. I mean, we kind of, conservatives today make a lot about the kind of left wing mistake of praising pride, but we don't catch ourselves for praising ambition. When St. Paul says that love is not ambitious, and that ambition is the sin, St. Thomas Aquinas teaches, that seeks greater honor for itself than what we deserve.
Hmm.
That it's trying to seek profits not so as to glorify God and help neighbor, but really just to glorify oneself. And so this is, one of these things that just, when I learned this is, it was just like, oh man, like I'm 10 feet in the hole on this one. Like my ambition is my life. That is what I'm trying to become, and it's really like a praise that I liked when people called me ambitious. Oh yeah, Jacob, he's a young ambitious guy. Now I hear that, it's like, stop calling me a vicious sinner, man. And it's just, but it really is that opposing vice to the virtue or the manifestation of the virtue of charity, which we call almsgiving. So whereas in ambition, we want to get ahead of our neighbor, whereas even in envy, we want, like Cain, to take our brother's life. In almsgiving, we really recognize that we are our brother's keeper and that we want a sharing of our own life in the other. Property, like in Greek, like when you hear about um, the prodigal son asking his father for a share of the inheritance, the word for property is bios. It's life. You hear the biology from the etymological root of that. What we have defines how we live. It really defines like who we are, our capabilities, our potentials, our expansions. And thus when we hand on our property, we're handing on a part of our life to the poor, letting them share in our life and allowing us a chance to share in theirs. This is the exact corrective that we need to our major sins of envy and ambition that is so pervasive in our American society. And thus it would make perfect sense that we ignore almsgiving during Lent. And it also makes sense why we need almsgiving so much more this Lent than ever before.
Hmm. Very beautiful. And I think it was St. Ambrose said, if you have two coats in your closet, one of them belongs to the man on the street.
Yeah.
When I first
Yeah.
read that, I think I like fell over a little bit. I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
I got to get
Totally.
rid of a lot of clothes.
Yeah. I have more than two coats. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah. But it's a beautiful, radical love. It's gorgeous. It's wonderful.
Mhm. Yeah. No, it
Well,
makes life worth living.
amen. And
Yeah.
it does correct some of the imbalance a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, well, we are actually getting towards the end of our time here, unfortunately. Any last thoughts? Anything you want to say right here at the end?
No, I'm just really looking forward to joining you guys in July. Joe told me it was going to be a great time, and I believe Joe. So
Joe has been to more of them than most people, so he should know. Uh,
great.
but yeah, thank you, and we definitely hope to see all of you there as well. New listeners, old listeners, come and join us. It'll be fun. Uh, well, again, thank you so much, Jacob, for joining us. This was really enlightening and
Thanks.
inspiring
That was
and
good.
a lot of fun. We'll have to do it again sometime. But remember, if you want to come and hear Jacob and talk to him at the conference, you can go to chesterton.org/conference. We'll also put a link to the New Polity Conference in our description so that you can check them out too. I'm within driving distance of Steubenville, so now I'm like, but
You gotta
anyway,
come. We're gonna have a great time.
yeah, it'll be fun. But anyway, two great conferences to come to this summer.
Yep.
Please come. Uh, and again, thank you so much, Joe, for helping to host this. It's always wonderful to have you here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Wonderful. And please like our podcast and subscribe to us. Leave us any comments that you can to help us to reach more people so that we can tell more people about Chesterton and about distributism and all of these wonderful ideas that the world so desperately needs. And thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate your community. And remember, Chesterton is always better with friends. Thank you. See you next time.